Welcome to another edition of Radio Influencers, a podcast series we're doing for Radio Update. I'm Andy Meadows, the host of the show. A few weeks ago, we devoted an episode of Radio Influencers to lessons radio people could learn from top podcasters. Today, I wanted to follow up with a part two because there's a lot of one podcast we didn't get to that I wanted to talk about. First, a quick correction, though. I meant to say Pod Save America crew, John Favreau, Tommy Vitor, John Levitt, and Dan Pfeiffer. And I misspoke and said Pod Save the World. Same company, both good podcasts, but a different group of guys than I was referencing on the show a couple episodes ago. I'd also like to recommend to any of you who haven't checked out my pal John Reynolds' video tips and tricks video series he's done for Radio Update and continues to do. Please check that out. John's the best video guy I know, and he does a great job explaining how easy and affordable it is for radio stations to film significantly more video content in their studios and on site, which I'm a firm believer in, of course. Plus, there are multiple episodes where John breaks down in detail the camera and lighting setup for some of these top podcasters. It's essentially a masterclass for radio people on how to create better video content. So check it out and start from episode 1 if you haven't watched any of it and just go through the episodes. In this follow-up episode of Radio Influencers, I wanted to start with a couple of podcasts that are doing a really good job with live events because I think how some of them are doing their live events would translate incredibly well to radio. I hope you like it. Kill Tony. If you don't know what Kill Tony is, ask your kids or ask some of the younger employees that work at your station because they certainly do. It's huge. It's the #1 live podcast, and it airs live on YouTube every week and averages somewhere around 2 million views a week. On the surface, it probably seemed like a very dumb concept when Tony Hinchcliffe launched the show in 2013 at the Comedy Store in LA. Amateur comics throw their name in a bucket and are selected at random throughout the show to perform 60 seconds of comedy. The show literally lasts two hours, 2.5 hours. After the comics perform their 60 seconds of comedy, Tony and his celebrity guests, often big-name comedians, act as judges, interact, and roast the amateur comics if it doesn't go well, and that's important because it quite often doesn't go well. Obviously, many of the amateur comics are uncomfortably bad. At first, it's kind of hard to watch it because it feels awkward when they bomb, live on YouTube and in front of this pretty big studio audience now, our audience there at the Comedy Club. But the handful of comics who do well are invited back as regulars, and if they continue doing well, they may even be invited on the Kill Tony tour for that plays live at arenas and in theaters now. Clearly, it didn't start out that big, but that's where it's gotten to. In 2020, Hinchcliffe relocated the show to Joe Rogan's Comedy Mothership in Austin, Texas, and that's when it really took off. There are now comics who literally moved to Austin just for the chance to be on this show. Others that go down there and camp out just for the chance of getting up on stage on this show in front of the big audience that it draws. The key to the show working, though, is the host, Tony Hinchcliffe. He spent years as a comedy writer for roasts, and many of you probably saw him crush on the recent Tom Brady roast live on Netflix. His commentary makes the show funny and entertaining regardless of how many comics are bad that day, which obviously varies. But another thing they do really well is they mix in ringers, something we're very familiar with in radio, ringers, of course. They know these people are going to perform well to even out the quality when they have a fair amount of folks bomb. Radio stations with the right kinds of on-air personalities could do live shows in this style. That's why I suggest that you watch this podcast if you haven't before. Maybe it would be focused on original music to not get dinged by copyright issues. If you have people get up and perform cover songs and you put that live on YouTube, eventually they're going to pull it down, or you're going to have to worry about the video sync licensing rules and all that jazz. Or it could be any other type of performance, local stand-ups, magicians, jugglers, whatever. I think there's a lot of personalities that I've worked with over the years that could do a show like this at the local level and have a lot of success with it. It's especially easy to do now because there are affordable ways to do multicam setups that would look very similar to how they're doing this show, that are easy to set up and operate and don't cost nearly as much as you think. There are also affordable devices you can get to make sure you're not relying on the venue's internet connection to make sure you have enough bandwidth for sending and streaming audio and video. Video, you're going to need like something 5 megabits per second guaranteed, 5 to 8 for 1080p. 4K it jumps up to like 25, but you're probably going to be doing 1080p, not to get too in the weeds. But if you need some help with all this, you can email me at andy@radiostationconsultant.com, and we can point you in the right direction on what kind of stuff to get and how to set it up. A quick rundown of a few other podcasts who've taken their show on the road and do live events now with them. TigerBelly is one. This is another Bobby Lee podcast he and his former girlfriend do together. Kalila, I think is her name. When they tour with the show, it turns into a crazy interactive live game show. This concept would be a natural fit for radio. I've often thought that radio could be doing some more live game shows, incorporating the video element, but not putting that part live on the air, of course, maybe segments of it, but it would be a great way to do live on social stuff that you then turn into a podcast after the fact. Smartless, I mentioned these guys last time. Obviously, really big podcast, Jason Bateman, Will Arnett, and Sean Hayes. They did a full live tour. They turned into a documentary that's worth watching. You'll also notice how they learned quickly what kind of guests translate better to the live theater shows and which ones don't, which was an interesting thing for them to kind of learn in real time as you're watching the documentary. Because, of course, when you're doing it in studio, there's some guests that are not going to work as well live on stage. Are You Garbage? Kevin Ryan and H. Foley were essentially unknown comics considering leaving the business when they started this podcast out of their homes. They interview fellow comics and other celebrities to determine if they are, in fact, a garbage person. It's marketed as a trashy comedy game show when they go live with it. And it, of course, translates very well to live shows. They're now doing it big venues across the country. That's one I would check out. First Date. So this is part of the Tom Segura family of podcasts. Tom does Two Bears, One Cave with Bert Kreischer, Your Mom's House with his wife, Christina. He also famously started the false but hilarious rumor that Garth Brooks is a secret serial killer. You might have heard that. Tom's a great podcaster, also relocated to Austin, and his company helped Lauren Compton start First Date. It's still building, just launched last year, but it's a great concept. She brings on celebrities, mainly comics, and asks them dating and relationship questions to try and show what it would be like to go on a first date with them, which is, of course, interesting with some of these celebrities. They also recently started doing some live events where they bring on singles. Her and the guests ask them dating questions, and the audience weighs in on whether that person has more red flags or green flags. This would also obviously translate well to radio personalities because it's kind of similar to some singles and matchmaking type promotions and features we've all done over the years. So that's another one I would suggest watching and listening to. Another podcast I wanted to highlight has nothing to do with live on stage events, but it's definitely live. It's Blogging the Boys live YouTube podcast with SB Nation's RJ Ochoa. I stumbled on this show, of course, because I'm a Dallas Cowboys super fan, but RJ is a great example of how one talented person who's good at multitasking can do a single person, interactive, and engaging podcast. After each Cowboys game, he streams live on YouTube with his thoughts on the game. You can listen to it afterwards on demand, of course, as well, or just as a podcast. He displays and responds in real time to comments in the chat and does all of this off the cuff. It's really impressive. And I'm pretty confident he's doing all of this by himself. I don't think it doesn't appear as though there's somebody else in there with him. But setup-wise, it also travels very well. He's using the same Shure MV7 microphone I use. I'm about to upgrade to the MV7 Plus. It's only like $20 more, but this plugs straight into a laptop, so it's super simple to use. Has built-in. There's a free Shure app that does built-in processing for it. It makes it sound pretty good. He's using he's using the same mic as me. I'm not sure what camera he uses. I use a Osbot Meet 4K USB camera, plugged straight into a laptop. Super easy to use. It's $150. The 1080 version is 100, but whatever he's using, it looks professional and looks good too. So it's real easy to travel with this setup and use it from anywhere. One thing to remember, it's easy to look at successful podcasts that have millions of listeners and viewers each week and get discouraged. But none of these podcasts started with millions of listeners and viewers. They all built it up over time, mostly organically, but strategically boosting things that are getting traction already, which I always suggest. And they all did it without spending tons of money on equipment up front because they started simple and upgraded as they grew, something I mentioned on part one. Heck, some of these top podcasts still use $100 Rode pod mics. Are You Garbage is an example of that. Those are $100 Rode pod mics. They're not expensive. And B, you don't need millions of downloads and views to make money, especially on the local level. There's value in a few thousand views when they're coming from people within your area. And radio's already set up to get in front of local advertisers and monetize this. So even with this part two, there are still a lot of other top podcasters with lessons to teach us. So we'll do a follow-up in another future episode of Radio Influencers. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll return with a new episode next Tuesday.